Iran's foreign minister has reportedly spoken to his counterparts in GCC countries and Iraq, and everything must be done to prevent a further escalation. To this end, I call on all member states to strictly uphold their obligations under international law, including the UN Charter, to respect and protect civilians in accordance with international humanitarian law, and to ensure nuclear safety. Let us act responsibly and together to pull the region and our world back from the brink. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'd like to thank the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his comprehensive, enlightening briefing. I'd also like to thank the Presidency of the Council for having convened this meeting at such short notice. The President of the French Republic, Monsieur Emmanuel Macron, asked that the Council immediately deal with this issue given the seriousness of the moment. Mr. President, this region needs peace. And in order to do this, we need Iran to respect its international obligations. We are very concerned at the launch of this new war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. The escalation underway is dangerous for everyone, and it must cease immediately. Faithful to principles and attachment to the United Nations, France calls for de-escalation, and we would recall that respect for international law is the condition for stability and long-term security in the region and throughout the world. We robustly condemn the indiscriminate attacks by Iran against several countries of the region. It is essential that we ensure the protection of civilians, and we express our solidarity with the countries that have been struck: Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, and with our regional partners. And we are ready to deploy the means necessary to protect them if they so request. We will take all measures necessary to ensure the security of our citizens in the Middle East. Mr. President, the events today come in the context of the ongoing pursuit by Iran of its nuclear program that is destabilizing and is contrary to the general guarantees system and resolutions of this Council. For years now, despite the diplomatic efforts deployed by France with our partners, Iran has not taken the opportunity to conclude an agreement with regard to a peaceful settlement with regard to its nuclear program. In parallel, Iran has reduced its cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, which for a long time now has not been able to guarantee the peaceful nature of the Iranian nuclear problem. For many months now, the agency has not had access to the most sensitive sites of the Iranian program. Transparency has still not been provided with regard to the Iranian stock of highly enriched at 6% uranium, which represents an amount which is potentially enough to produce around 10 explosive nuclear warheads. The situation is such and so serious that last August, we launched the procedure to re-establish the Security Council sanctions in response to the clear non-respect by Iran of its commitments. Over and above its nuclear program, it's also the ballistic program and the regional actions taken by Iran that continue to constitute sources of major destabilization. Iran is continuing also a policy of systematic destabilization in countries of the region through the support that it provides to its regional allies, be that Hamas, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, or previously the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We remain profoundly concerned by the suffering of the Iranian people, given the systematic and brutal repression that they have suffered for many years. For several weeks now, this people has seen an unleashing of unjustifiable state violence because it had the courage to demonstrate for a better life and for freedom. The Iranian people must be able to exercise their fundamental rights and must be able to freely decide their destiny. Mr. President, on the 28th of September, resolutions of this council with regard to the Iranian nuclear program were re-established. These resolutions called upon Iran to suspend its enrichment activities of uranium, to cooperate with the IAEA with regard to its ballistic activities. The Council must ensure that these resolutions are implemented, also by ensuring that the 1737 committee is functioning properly. Iran must commit, finally, to good faith negotiations with regard to its nuclear and ballistic program, and also with regard to its regional action. France, together with the E3, has been mobilized now for 20 years to find a negotiated diplomatic solution, the only thing that will solve this issue in a viable way. Together with our partners, we showed in 2015 with the JCPOA and Resolution 2231 of this Council that it was possible to reach an agreement. Today, still, the peaceful settlement of disputes must be our priority. We feel that an agreement is possible, and that's why Iran must seriously commit to negotiations to achieve this. We will remain available together with our partners to find a robust, verifiable, and lasting solution that will guarantee that Iran never has a nuclear weapon. At this serious time, the Council must come together to call for de-escalation for respect of international law and search for a negotiated solution in order to re-establish lasting peace in the region. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, President. At the outset, I would like to thank the United Kingdom for heeding our call and for inviting to this session at this important moment. I also extend our appreciation to His Excellency the Secretary General for his briefing and for the information regarding the recent events and their repercussions on regional and international peace and security. Mr. President, my country never expected, my country which is a champion of peace and coexistence, never expected to be targeted by wanton aggressions without any justification. On behalf of the government of the Kingdom of Bahrain, my country strongly condemns the missile attacks targeting vital facilities and residential areas inside the Kingdom of Bahrain on Saturday. They were launched by the Islamic Republic of Iran, which confirmed its responsibility for these cowardly attacks. These attacks are a violation of our sovereignty and territorial integrity and the safety of our people, and they represent an indirect and unjustified attack that violates flagrantly international law, the UN Charter. It is also a grave threat to international and regional peace and security. The Kingdom of Bahrain strongly condemns these acts of aggression, which represent an unprecedented escalation. We reaffirm that targeting our territories, our vital facilities, and residential buildings is a hostile act that is rejected, and we will deal with it firmly. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain is today under attack that are part of the missile attacks targeting several sisterly states in the region in recent hours, including the United Arab Emirates, the State of Kuwait, the State of Qatar, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, besides targeting sites in Jordan and in the Syrian Arab Republic. These grave developments reflect an escalatory pattern targeting our collective security. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain reaffirms that these attacks represent a blatant violation of the prohibition to threat or use force against the territorial integrity of states as per paragraph 4 of Article 2 of the UN Charter. We hold the government of Iran fully responsible for these attacks, and the Kingdom rejects any justifications or explanations aiming at justifying these hostile activities or to violate international law. We reaffirm our steadfast commitment to the principles and purposes of the UN Charter, and we reserve our full and inherent right to answer in a commensurate manner with the scope of these attacks and to take all measures necessary to re-establish our security, safety, to protect our territories, our citizens, and our residents, according to Article 151 of the UN Charter and pursuant to international law in coordination with our partners and allies. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain calls upon the Security Council to shoulder its responsibilities in confronting these grave violations and to adopting a firm position to end these hostilities, to condemn them and prevent their recurrence in a way that guarantees regional and international peace and security. Allow me now to deliver this statement on behalf of the GCC countries, the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Sultanate of Oman, the State of Qatar, the State of Kuwait, and my country, the Kingdom of Bahrain, as well as on behalf of the Kingdom of Jordan and the Syrian Arab Republic. At the outset, and on behalf of the GCC countries, Jordan and Syria, I would like to thank you, Mr. President, for convening this session, and I thank the Secretary General for his briefing. And as stated in the letter addressed to the Presidency today, several missile attacks launched by Iran targeted the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Sultanate of Oman, the State of Qatar, the State of Kuwait, and my country, the Kingdom of Bahrain, as well as the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and the Syrian Arab Republic, in a blatant violation of the sovereignty of these states and territorial integrity, and in a violation of their safety and in violation of principles of international law and the UN Charter. This represents a rejected escalation that threatens the security and stability of the region. These Iranian wanton and irresponsible actions also caused the injury of several residents and nationals in these countries and killed one civilian at least. They also damaged several facilities and civilian infrastructure, besides disrupting air navigation in the region, and also threatens to disrupt maritime navigation through the Hormuz Straits. This is a violation of international law and will have very grave international repercussions. Our countries reaffirm that these violations constitute a violation of the prohibition of the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity of states as per paragraph 4 of Article 2 of the UN Charter. We hold the government of Iran fully responsible for these attacks, and we reject any justifications or explanations to justify this hostile behavior or to manipulate rules of international law. We reaffirm that Article 51 of the Charter does not justify in any way these cowardly attacks. GCC countries strongly condemn and denounce this Iranian wanton aggression, and we reaffirm that targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure is condemned and rejected by all international and human standards. We reiterate our full solidarity with the sisterly countries that were targeted, and we stress that the security of the sisterly countries are part and parcel of our security, and that targeting any of these states means or represent a threat to the security and stability of the whole region, and we warn against the repercussions of this refused escalation. Mr. President, these Iranian attacks are not compatible with the good neighborliness principles, and they cannot be accepted in any way. We strongly reject using the territories of the countries of the region as a scene to score points or to expand the conflict, following the efforts made by the GCC countries, Jordan, and the region as a whole in order to facilitate dialogue between Iran and the international community in order to settle differences in peaceful means and to avoid escalation in the region. While the GCC countries reaffirm that their steadfast commitment to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, they reserve their full and inherent right to self-defense pursuant to Article 51 of the UN Charter, and reserve the right to retaliate against this brutal attack in a compensate manner and in line with international law. We reserve the right to take all necessary measures to restore security and stability and to protect our territories, our people and residents, and to guarantee our sovereignty, security, stability, and national interests. Mr. President, in conclusion, the GCC countries appreciate all the positions supporting our sovereignty and security. We call upon the Security Council to shoulder all its responsibilities in confronting these grave Iranian violations and to take a firm stance condemning and refusing these unjustified and irresponsible attacks and preventing their recurrence in a way that guarantees regional and international stability and security. We call for containing this crisis to preserve the stability, security of the region, to protect its peoples, and to avoid a wider confrontation. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we'd like to thank the Secretary General for his briefing. First of all, I wish to express our firm rejection of the fact that the presidency today, that the meeting today is taking place under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East. We wish to recall that Russia and China requested that it be held under the agenda item, threats to international peace and security. That request was also contained in the relevant letter of the Iranian colleagues. The aggression that Iran has been subjected to today threatens to lead to escalation in an already escalated region, and it could go far beyond its borders. Particularly given the fact that one of the two initiators of this military venture is far from being a state in the region. Attempts by the British presidency to artificially downplay the degree of danger of the current situation is simply unacceptable. The presidency also grossly scorned Russia and China's request to invite as a briefer to today's meeting the professor at Columbia University, Jeffrey Sachs. The British colleagues do everything they can to assert the importance of inviting representatives of civil society to Security Council meetings. That clearly does not apply to cases when world-recognized academics are going to present truth that is unacceptable to the Western governments. In recent hours, we have witnessed a further extremely dangerous ratcheting up of escalation in the Middle East. Early in the morning of the 28th of February, the United States and Israel began launching massive military strikes on the territory of Iran. It was declared that one of the aims of the attacks one of the targets were the senior political leadership of the country and also civilian nuclear facilities. In real time, we are getting reports from the Iranian authorities about casualties, including among the civilian population. More than 200 people have died in 24 provinces of the country. We were particularly aggrieved to learn of the strike on a girls' school in Minab, where it is reported that 85 children were killed. We sincerely express our sincere condolences to the family and loved ones of the victims, and we wish a swift recovery to the injured. Our country will do everything necessary to ensure the security and safety of Russian citizens that are on the territory of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Mr. President, Washington and West Jerusalem's actions are nothing other than yet another unprovoked act of armed aggression against a sovereign and independent UN member state in violation of the Charter of the organization and of the fundamental principles of international law. They are openly aimed at further interfering in the internal affairs of Iran and at destroying a state that has found disfavor with the West. The US and Israel's irresponsible step, reckless step, as we warned previously, has already led to a sharp escalation of the situation across the region. Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Syria and Saudi Arabia have all been affected. And those countries that have repeatedly said to their American partners that they don't need this escalation in the Middle East. Moreover, the US and Israel military operation has been a betrayal of diplomacy. These countries once again are bringing to bear military force against Iran at the very height of negotiations, just as they did in June 2025. Just the day before yesterday, on the 26th of February in Geneva, there was the latest round of US-Iranian contacts with the facilitation of Oman. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, noted that an understanding and agreement had been reached to continue the dialogue. For our part, we underscore that the Russian side has repeatedly received signals that the Israelis have no interest in a military confrontation with Iran. And then, despite Tehran's willingness to engage in the diplomatic process, it once again is stabbed in the back. Moreover, the fact that Washington for such a long time and methodically was building up its military presence in the region only confirms the fact that aggression against Iran was planned in advance. The actions of the United States and Israel risk triggering a humanitarian and economic catastrophe. Of particular concern, once again, are the threats to nuclear safety and security and radiological safety and security. The statements today from the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to the effect that this operation was aimed at preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon are not justified. They are unfounded. Tehran has consistently stated that it does not have any such plans and that is fulfilling its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Moreover, Iran has repeatedly underscored its readiness to put at the basis of new agreements with the United States the preservation of its status as a state, as a non-nuclear weapons state, provided that there is observation and respect for the legitimate right of the Islamic Republic of Iran as a state party to the NPT to develop peaceful nuclear technologies. Against this backdrop, the attempts of Western countries to justify the US and Israeli aggression as though there were some alleged threats to international peace and security are unfounded. These are threats that were allegedly coming from the Iranian nuclear program. We, of course, recall that the only source of reliable information in this regard are the relevant reports of the IAEA Director General, and those reports never indicated that. And they never said that Iran may be engaging in the development of a nuclear weapon. The objects that strikes are being launched against are under the agency's safeguards, that is to say, a priori, they cannot be used for any such activities. Against this backdrop, we expect that the IAEA Director General, Rafael Grossi, will provide unambiguous assessments and will condemn this latest undermining of the NPT's authority and undermining of the global regime for the non-proliferation by the USA and Israel. Nuclear energy objects, including the Bushehr nuclear power plant, cannot in any circumstances be the target of strikes by armed forces. That is unacceptable. Mr. President, we note that today's events were the latest phase of consistent escalatory steps around Iran by Western countries. That includes the US-Israeli strikes on the country's territory in June 2025 and the US's open interference and the open interference by US allies in the domestic political situation in Iran in January of this year. We also remember the failed attempts by the United Kingdom, France, and Germany to trigger the mechanism to restore the effect of Security Council anti-Iran resolutions, the so-called snapback mechanism. However, that did not happen. Russia and a number of other UN member states repeatedly and in detail explained the reasons why the United Kingdom, France, and Germany did not have the right to invoke that mechanism. However, that did not work, and the United States and Israel once again have brought military force to bear. There are obvious parallels with the events of 2003, when the US representatives waved a test tube around in this room to justify their invasion of Iraq by saying that there were weapons of mass destruction present there that no one actually found. In 2023, US Vice President J.D. Vance said that the Iraq campaign was unforced. As a result, innocent Iraqis and Americans died, and that Washington had to learn that lesson. However, as it turns out, that lesson has not yet been learned. In the statements of the European colleagues, and we'll hear that again today, instead of condemning aggression and the deaths of Iranian civilians, we once again will hear the statement of the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, saying the Iranian regime must understand that it has no other option but to engage in good faith negotiations to end its nuclear and ballistic programs, as well as its regional destabilization activities, end quote. Similar assessments were voiced by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer. These absurd statements were then backed up by a joint statement of the leaders of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, condemning only Iran's strikes on the countries in the region. Colleagues, just think for a moment. This sort of reaction is coming at a time when Iran has been subject to armed attack, to military attack at the peak of an active negotiating process. The hypocrisy of our European colleagues knows no borders. And these aren't even double standards. It's a parallel reality. The other side of the looking glass. In the English language, there's an ideal term to describe the situation: victim blaming. One gets the impression that London, Paris, and Berlin are living within illusions that they have created for themselves and are broadcasting to the world. However, attempts to mislead the international community are doomed to fail. Any common sense person will fully well understand who is responsible, who bears responsibility for this latest uncontrolled escalation. Mr. President, we demand that the United States and Israel immediately cease their aggressive actions. An alternative to resolving the Iranian subject, including its nuclear component, the alternative to peaceful and diplomatic means simply does not exist, and it never has. We insist on the immediate resumption of political and diplomatic settlement efforts and the pursuit of solutions based on international law, mutual respect, and a balance of interests. Russia unchangingly stands ready to provide all necessary assistance for that work. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing and support his call for de-escalation and return to diplomatic negotiations. Today, the United States and Israel brazenly launched military strikes against targets inside Iran, causing a sudden escalation of regional tensions. China is deeply concerned about this development. China consistently advocates that all parties should abide by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and opposes and condemns the use or threat of force in international relations. China stresses that the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Iran and other regional countries must be respected. China is deeply saddened by the large number of civilian casualties caused by the conflict. At all times, the red line for protecting civilians in armed conflict must not be crossed, and the indiscriminate use of force is unacceptable. China calls on all parties to fulfill their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, effectively ensure the safety of civilians and avoid attacks on civilian facilities. The use of force is not the right way to settle international disputes. It only intensifies hatred and confrontation. The escalation and spillover of tensions in the Middle East serves no one's interests. Dialogue and negotiations are the only way to resolve differences. China calls on an immediate cessation of military actions to prevent further cycles of escalation. The military strikes occurred at a time when the US and Iran were engaged in diplomatic negotiations, which is shocking. The parties concerned should demonstrate political sincerity, resume dialogue and negotiations as soon as possible, and return to the right track of a political solution. China stands ready to work with the international community to advance peace efforts and help restore peace and stability in the Middle East at an early date. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank the United Kingdom in its capacity as President of the Security Council for the prompt convening of this emergency meeting at the request of several countries, including Colombia. We would also like to thank the Secretary General for the information shared, and we welcome the delegations participating at this meeting. Colombia is taking the floor guided by an essential conviction. The protection of human life must always be at the heart of international decisions. And we're also equally convinced that the United Nations Charter is binding. Colombia reaffirms its unequivocal defense of international law and of the purposes and principles of the Charter, international peace and security, the peaceful settlement of disputes, the prohibition of the use or the threat of the use of force, the sovereign equality of states, respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of all states, and non-intervention. Mr. President, we are facing a serious military escalation that threatens to spill over into a regional confrontation with unpredictable consequences. The use of force and the logic of reprisals are substituting diplomacy, dialogue, and law. In the face of this alarming situation, we condemn any military action that is contrary to the Charter, wherever it comes from. Our country has been consistent in this organization and in this council. No state may unilaterally claim the right to attack another in order to impose regime change. And that principle does not depend on who the actor is, as it is a pillar of the international order. The prohibition of the use or threat of force enshrined in the Charter does not admit selective interpretations. When that principle is violated, international security does not prevail. The law of the strongest takes over. When force replaces law, the international order is weakened and barbarism takes its place, and the first to lose are civilians. Colombia condemns the attacks and expresses solidarity with the peoples of Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Kuwait. Colombia expresses its deep concern over the human cost of this escalation. Bombings are exposing entire communities to fear and to risk, including girls and boys. No military goal can justify, under any circumstances, civilians being caught in the crossfire or becoming victims of indiscriminate attacks. The protection of life must always be our highest priority. Life cannot be considered collateral damage. In this regard, we strongly condemn reported attacks against civilians and against civilian objects. This is in clear violation of international humanitarian law. particularly the principle of distinction, and we urge the immediate cessation of hostilities, strict respect for international law and international humanitarian law is not optional. The protection of the civilian population is a legal and moral obligation. Mr. President, for these reasons, Colombia prioritizes dialogue and the peaceful settlement of disputes, not because we are naive, but on the basis of our experience, because we know that war does not resolve conflicts. On the contrary, it worsens them, it makes them more cruel, perpetuates them, and passes them on to future generations. Defending international law does not mean ignoring reality. Iran has international obligations that it must fully comply with, particularly in the nuclear and human rights fields. With regard to Iran's nuclear program, full, effective, and transparent cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency is essential. Therefore, we call on Iran to return to the path of dialogue and negotiations in good faith, with a view to guaranteeing unrestricted access to nuclear facilities subject to monitoring and verification, and to resolving outstanding safeguards issues under the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Colombia reaffirms the universal goal of general and complete nuclear disarmament, and in that context, we insist that Iran's nuclear program must be maintained exclusively for peaceful purposes in compliance with its international obligations. Collective security is not built with more weapons, but with more guarantees. Likewise, we join the urgent call of the IAEA for the parties to exercise restraint in the use of force, particularly against nuclear facilities, taking into account the enormous risks that such actions represent. Furthermore, Iran has the obligation to respect and guarantee the human rights and fundamental freedoms of its population, which are not a concession of the state. Much rather, these are rights that are inherent to human dignity. But we also state with the same degree of firmness that Iran's non-compliance in these areas cannot serve as justification for the unilateral carrying out of military attacks against a state. The full application of the Charter is indispensable for the credibility of multilateralism and the preservation of the international order. International peace and security are not built by violating the sovereignty or the territorial integrity of states, nor through reprisals. They are built through rules and through dialogue. Mr. President, Colombia calls on all parties to exercise restraint and de-escalation, to urgently return to the diplomatic path, to strictly respect international law, and to strengthen existing multilateral mechanisms. It is a priority to move forwards towards a framework for regional dialogue that allows us to address the underlying causes of instability in the Middle East. Therefore, we propose the convening of a peace conference for the region under the auspices of the United Nations in order to achieve sustainable political solutions. War is not a foregone conclusion. It is a political decision, but so is peace. Today, the true responsibility of the international community and of this Council is to choose it, assuming with historical responsibility its primary mandate to preserve international peace and security. The United Nations organization cannot fall short of the gravity of this moment. It needs to choose to stop destruction before it becomes irreversible, and make space for diplomacy before it is too late. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Colombia for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you. Distinguished delegates, this is a moment in history that requires moral clarity, and President Trump has met the moment. The most fundamental duty of any sovereign government is the protection of its people. Operation Epic Fury is directed towards specific and strategic objectives: to dismantle missile capabilities that threaten allies, to degrade naval assets used to destabilize international waters, and to disrupt the machinery that arms proxy militias, and to ensure the Iranian regime never, ever can threaten the world with a nuclear weapon. As President Trump said last night, for decades, the Iranian regime has willfully destabilized the world. It has killed American forces and citizens, threatened regional allies, and jeopardized the security of international shipping upon which the world depends. Its massive support for violent proxies, declared terrorist organizations, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, has brought bloodshed and disorder across the Middle East for far too long. This is not speculation. We know this to be true, and our men and women have paid for the actions of this regime and the IRGC with their lives. No responsible nation can ignore persistent aggression and violence. The regime in Tehran has led attacks that have cost American lives, hundreds of U.S. Marines in Lebanon, thousands of troops in Iraq. American hostage after hostage has suffered. Our ships fired upon dozens of times in the Red Sea. Iran has armed and financed militant organizations that undermine lawful governments and destabilize an already fragile region. Iran's continued pursuit of advanced missile capabilities, coupled with its refusal to abandon nuclear ambitions despite diplomatic opportunities, presents a grave and mounting danger. The international community has long affirmed a simple and necessary principle: Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That principle is not a matter of politics, it's a matter of global security. And to that end, the United States is taking lawful actions. This body, the United States Security Council, has acted repeatedly on this threat. 20 years ago, starting in 2006, Resolution 1696 demanded that Iran suspend all uranium enrichment related and reprocessing activities, invoking Chapter 7 of the UN Charter and adopting a legally binding resolution. When Iran failed to comply, this council followed with Resolution 1737, imposing mandatory sanctions, including bans on nuclear-related materials and technology, asset freezes on key individuals and entities linked to their nuclear program, and establishing a sanctions committee. Subsequent resolutions, 1747 in the year 2007, expanded arms embargoes and asset freezes. Resolution 1803 in 2008 tightened restrictions on dual-use goods and calling for the inspections of Iranian cargo. Resolution 1835 in 2008 reaffirmed the need for full compliance. And Resolution 1927 in 2010, which was the most comprehensive, banning ballistic missile activities, tightening the conventional arms embargo, targeting the IRGC and shipping lines, and prohibiting new Iranian banking relationships, built a robust multilateral framework to curb Iran's nuclear and missile pursuits. These measures, again, adopted under Chapter 7, represented the world's collective judgment that Iran's actions posed a threat to international peace and security. And despite numerous opportunities for an alternative path, Iran remained defiant. And the Security Council decided on September 19th of last year, 2025, to restore these measures, snapback sanctions, sending a clear message that the world will not acquiesce to threats and half measures, and Tehran would be held to account. On top of these actions by the UN, American diplomacy was attempted repeatedly and in good faith. President Trump, Secretary Rubio, our special envoys, Witkoff and Kushner, were relentlessly dedicated to diplomacy. But diplomacy cannot succeed where there is no genuine willingness to cease aggression, where there is no genuine partner for peace. As President Trump said today, and he spoke directly to the Iranian people. He said, quote, "To the proud, great people of Iran, I saw tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand." The entire world has witnessed the regime's wholesale slaughter of innocent civilians. The sad irony is that this same regime will attempt to lecture us today about human rights and the rule of law. Its presence here in this council makes a mockery of this body. But where the UN lacks moral clarity, the United States of America will maintain it. Indiscriminate and unprovoked attacks by the Iranian regime today against our regional partners, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, and others, reinforce precisely why such actions are necessary. The regime has not only struck military assets, but civilian infrastructure as well. Those who stand with us must know that their security is not negotiable. The safety of our allies is not conditional. It is assured. The bottom line is this, colleagues: our allies and partners can count on the United States and can count on President Trump. Colleagues, peace is not preserved by appeasing those who threaten it. Peace is preserved through strength in the face of terror. History has taught us that the cost of inaction is far greater than the burden of decisive action. And our president, President Trump, has taken that decisive action today. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to the UK Presidency for convening the Council for this urgent meeting following the latest developments in the Middle East. I also wish to thank the Secretary General for his statement. Today's developments are deeply concerning and pose the risk of further destabilizing an already volatile situation at a time of heightened tensions in the Middle East. Mr. President, let me reiterate our deep concern over Iran's unacceptable behavior related to its nuclear program, its ballistic missiles, its destabilizing activities in the region and beyond, and its violent crackdown and repression against its own people. As a consequence, the European Union, with Denmark's active support, has adopted strong sanctions against Iran, just like we have always been promoting diplomatic efforts to address the nuclear and ballistic missile programs through a negotiated solution. I also wish to express Denmark's condemnation of Iran's attacks today on countries of the region. This must stop immediately. We express our full solidarity with partners in the region under attack. Mr. President, at this critical juncture, de-escalation is imperative. A broader regional escalation would have devastating consequences for the Middle East and for international peace and security. We call for maximum restraint and respect for international law, including international humanitarian law. What is needed is for diplomatic efforts to reduce tension and for the negotiations to resume in good faith as the only viable, lasting solution to the Iranian nuclear issue. Iran must never be allowed to develop or acquire a nuclear weapon. This is essential for regional and international security. Finally, Mr. President, for years now, we have heard the Iranian people calling for dignity, for opportunity, and for their fundamental rights to be respected. For too long, authorities in Tehran have failed to heed these calls. We call on Iran to refrain from further attacks, give up their weapons programs, and to meaningfully engage with the international community in a manner consistent with its international obligations and the will and aspirations of its own citizens. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, President. I would like to thank the Secretary General for his sobering presentation and assessment of the unfolding situation in the Middle East after concerning developments in the region. We concur with his view that there is no viable alternative to a peaceful settlement. President, Pakistan condemns the initiation of unwarranted attacks against the Islamic Republic of Iran in violation of international law. Yet again, these attacks come at a time when renewed diplomatic efforts were underway to reach a peaceful and negotiated solution. Such a course of action will undermine the peace and stability of the entire region with far-reaching consequences. Pakistan also condemns the attacks against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, and stands in solidarity with all these brotherly countries and underscores the need to exercise maximum restraint. This is extremely unfortunate since several brotherly Arab countries were in fact supporting dialogue and emphasizing the need to avoid escalation. We particularly laud Oman's role in facilitating and mediating dialogue between Iran and the United States. These
of 2026. The reported military strikes carried out by the United States in coordination with their Israeli forces against targets inside the Islamic Republic of Iran and Iran's subsequent response represents a perilous and deeply troubling escalation, one that marks a serious intensification of hostilities in the Middle East and threatens to engulf the entire region in an uncontrollable cycle of violence, suffering, and pain. The A3 condemns the missiles and drone attacks carried out by Iran against the sovereign territories of Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The A3 reiterates that all member states must respect their obligations under international law, including the Charter, which prohibits the threat of the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. These actions risk further destabilizing the Middle East and underscore the urgent imperative to safeguard broader peace and internal stability, particularly as the geographic scope of military activity expands beyond the initial parties to the conflict. The A3 remains steadfast in its commitment to the fundamental principles of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. At the same time, the A3 recognizes the concerns of all states in the region, which must be addressed through dialogue and peaceful means in accordance with international law and the UN Charter. We believe that all member states